The Tasmanian Community Fund presents the Breaking Barriers Building Futures podcast, hosted by Michelle Swallow in conversation with Shamal Das.
Welcome everybody. To start with, I'd like to acknowledge that we're meeting on Aboriginal land across Australia, and it's land that's never been ceded, and thank Elders past and present for their continuing custodianship of our land and our waterways and our oceans and also our communities. So Shamal Das is just an amazing human being that I was lucky enough to meet through the TCF-funded Governance for Social Impact workshops and program that we've done, things that I continue to think about in terms of the learnings about impact and systems. But Shamal is also currently the chair of ARACY, which is an organisation that's working very closely to really have impact for young people. Shamal is also the head of Family Advisory and Philanthropic Services for JBWere, and he's the Adjunct Associate Professor at Centre for Social Impact at UNSW. It's delightful that he's agreed to join us today. Shamal, thank you so much for joining us today for this session. I'm really appreciating that you're making the time, so thank you.
Absolute pleasure.
Obviously, one of the reasons that we wanted to have a chat with you is your incredible experience, particularly with ARACY and philanthropy and all of your governance, particularly in terms of governance and social impact. And so I thought we might start with you just telling us a little bit about your passion in some of those areas and how you connect them all together.
Well, that's how long do we have? No. It's I think it's a lot of my worldview is obviously like many of ours, formed pretty early by what you see around you. So in essence, the very short form story is I was born in Fiji, and so my the reason there's so many Indians in Fiji is obviously because of there's a colonial story there, in terms of the British bringing them there around industry and establishing the sugarcane industry and other things. So my family's part of that story. Clearly not from the not much in the wealth accumulation phase. My mum's the eldest of 9 children, so we grew up. We never felt like, in hindsight, you'd probably tell us we grew up in poverty, but didn't feel like it at the time. So it's that story's there. And then we had the political coup in '87, and my parents decided to migrate for the safety and opportunity of their children. I'm one of 3, and so we ended up in Australia. My aunt that sponsored us was from rural Queensland, up in Blackall. We ended up, if you would remember, perhaps Michelle, the '80s. It wasn't a time of economic prosperity in Australia. It was quite dire. So 18% interest rates on the way, as my dad reminds me all the time. And then we moved to Sydney and the outskirts of Sydney where we could afford to live. And so I just grew up there. And I guess how I sort of ended up here is sort of, in a weird way, economics. So, went to school. Obviously, my mum went only to year 8. So, most migrants believe education is the key, mostly for children, for opportunity. And in Australia, with a public school system like we have, you have that opportunity. And so I went to Sydney Uni, did economics and government and finance, which ended up in where I've ended up in my career. But I always had a love for economics, and I realize now it's just because economics teaches you systems and thinking and interactions and the same thing that we apply to behavior, in essence, behavioral economics, game theory, how trade wars happen and how they play out, it's sort of, and the historical context of politics and economics, sort of, that's where I led down this path. And then just by sheer luck ended up working in a place called Perpetual Trustees out of university, and got exposed to philanthropy and trusts and charities, and sort of just kept unraveling down that path, and here I
am. So why did you decide then, putting that sort of the systems thinking that you learnt through your economics degree and then the experience with philanthropy, why did you decide that really the focus was going to be around young people and children?
Well, yeah, it's sort of, I guess wasn't really my focus area. In essence, as a young man growing up, you sort of take a lot of things for granted. But like for most people, having children kind of focuses the mind a bit. I was talking to a young colleague who's 3 weeks away from his first, and I was just sort of describing it. Now that my son's 17, and my daughter's just shy of 14, and so having them sort of made me think about how different their growing up, or their youth and childhood is compared to mine. And so and their mother grew up in Maitland, up in rural, sort of regional, not rural, regional, New South Wales. And so it was interestingly a very different lifestyle and growing up, and sort of thinking about that. And then obviously technology came in, which made their youth very different. I remember getting a phone, for instance, and they've lived with it their whole life in a sense. So I guess children and youth I ended up in because, we've had some things happen in our own family, in terms of marriage breakdowns, some alcohol and drug addictions, and et cetera, et cetera. And so one thing that I was grappling with myself was I guess the navigation of, how do you look after children and their mental health and their safety and security in circumstances that are beyond their control. At that stage, it would have been a 11-year-old boy and an 8-year-old girl would deal with things very differently, given where their development is and what they needed. And I guess my personal engagement was, well, I started then seeing, well, what is the support like at school? And you go, oh, well, it's quite variable, and we live in a really nice area, but their access to counselling and other things in school was quite limited. And even, and then engaging with the GP system to get mental health plans and to get into, trying to find the right child psychologist and therapist, and then getting them in there and then paying for it. And I'm like, geez, it's not easy, and I know what I'm doing. I'm highly educated and I have money. And so then I just started thinking about, well, there's so many people who just don't have access at all. And even if they had access, even if they had money, I'm not sure they could navigate it. And then I sort of started applying my work into going, well, what is going on with children and youth? That through my good friend Professor Christy Muir, who we co-created the course with. She was already on the ARACY board at the time, and invited me to join because, especially for ARACY, it was in a phase of evolution itself from an organisation that was research focused, framework focused, into, well, perhaps we need to do more than just that to drive outcomes, because the reports that we were seeing at the time, the census data was telling us that actually kids were, there were more and more kids in out-of-home care. There were more and more kids at risk of homelessness. There were more and more kids at, suffering from mental health problems. Well, and then you look at the other side of the ledger and there's billions and billions and billions of dollars being spent on these things. And you're like, well, what's going on here? And you have to sort of, writing research reports about it at some point. Research is really important, and continuing learning and development and framework development is really critical, but that alone was not creating the type of momentum or shift in these numbers. So, you can sort of read about it or talk about it, or you get involved and do something about it. So that's where I ended up on that job, and eventually taking over as chair more recently, probably a couple of years ago, from Professor Cheney, has put me deep in the middle of a lot of this. But really, I think there's no more critical investment. We talk about housing, and we talk about productivity, and we talk about workforce. Well, it's these children's, it's these children's future. It's their country. And we're meant to, I think we need to do a bit more of a recovery, given what the benefits our generation have reaped from it. So we need to, steward it into at least the right direction, rather than leaving them a flaming mess.
It's interesting, as you know, with the Tasmanian Community Fund, strategically we decided to sort of, how do we have biggest impact in this state? And went out to the community and asked them, if we were spending at the time 6.5 million a year, but if it was 65 million over 10 years, what do you want us to spend it on? And people said, let's look at our educational attainment rates, and we really need to make, getting rid of those barriers to education and learning for young people, which my background as a social worker, I know it's all to do with all the systems, so homelessness and mental health and wellbeing, alcohol and other drug addictions, et cetera, and how those systems don't often talk to each other. So how did we have that biggest impact? So really that aligns beautifully. And I know that ARACY just did releasing the State of Children report, and that some of your recommendations are indeed about how do we make sure that young people can access mental health services. And so, that was of interest in one of your recommendations, but of course the others were around establishing a commission and a framework and actually holding some people accountable, I guess, as well.
Yeah, well, it is interesting, isn't it? It's when you think about what's in front of them, some of the reports we see out of high school that some of my colleagues in NAB Economics run on children in high school, it's in essence, I feel like it's our hand wringing and negativity, I think, around some of the issues that are actually infecting the worldview of the children who might actually have a better optimism around what might be ahead in their future. I think it's our despair on their behalf that might be sometimes part of the problem. Probably banging on about the good old days continuously doesn't help. Time before technology or whatever, right? That's not coming back. So we've got to figure out how to work with it. But, if we think about one of the things what really interests me is obviously we know teens are going to be caring about job prospects, late teens, housing if they need to go into the rental market. Those sorts of things are important. But, this report, the State of Australia's Children, which only came out I was just in Canberra on Monday with the launch, and ARACY's got a webinar coming up on it as well, was that it's the 12 to 17-year-olds, like 43 of them are worried about housing. 43% of 12 to 17-year-olds. And then 37 mental health, and then 32 on digital online safety, right? Or probably access to. But, when you interview, as I said, the stats are the stats, it's billions, it's thousands, but having the voices of 2,000 children, the teens we're used to, but through those, 12 to 15-year-olds down into I think the youngest was 3 years old. And you have to design a program to listen to them. And that's, that was the part that was worrying, is that we've got children who are 12-year-olds probably feeling the housing stress of their families, and it's affecting the way they're going about their world. So if you're really worried about your mental health of your parents who are struggling with housing, how do you turn up to school and just get on with it, right? It's, as you were saying, you're learning. If you haven't eaten that morning, like there's just pure physical health issues. Kids are not nourished. They can't learn if they're not nourished. And we know all this. So as you know on the front line is, you can say, we want great education and learning outcomes, but you are interfacing with every other system, which is creating the barrier to the outcome you want. So if you're not conscious of those, you could educate the teachers more, throw as much money as you want at the education system, but it's not going to produce a better outcome because the thing that needs to be addressed isn't in the education system.
That's right.
Yeah. So I find, And the other part of that, the other part to pick up about that is that you picked up was that National Early Years Commission and a data framework. So we actually are tracking progress properly across geographies and age groups and cohorts. But you know what? They don't vote, do they? So they don't have that much interest for certain parts of the population, and they don't have wealth. So they don't have that much power. So unless we do something on their behalf or put their voice into the decision making, how do we make progress? Which is what sits behind those. If we're not designing our frameworks around them, if we're designing our framework around wealthy retired people, then we'll,
So if you had access to, say, make up a number, $10 million, how would you encourage young people's voice?
10 million. It's interesting, isn't it? It's so much money, and then in certain systems it's nothing. It'll disappear in about 10 seconds. So, which is the challenge at TCF, I imagine, is, where do we actually apply this clinically for impact?
Yes.
There's a couple of things, and I would say if it was 10 million, What would I do? Okay, let's split it in half. I would split it into um, the stuff. I mean, nearly reflecting what TCF's doing is I would be creating a lot more. Let's say I put half of it, 5 million, into scholarships for
Mm-hmm.
young leaders to do, for instance, the um, give them both access to the Governing for Social Impact course and probably the AICD's Foundations in Directors course. I want more young
Yep.
people on boards and
Yep.
take
Great.
so to take the barriers away so their voice is at the table.
Yes.
Right? We've got plenty of 60-year-olds with a lot of executive experience in retirement on boards and mid-career executives, and that's great,
Mm.
right? That's all great, but how do you solve for a generation that you are so far? I mean, I'm not even, well,
Mm.
I am very far away. I reckon I'm not, but I am. But you'd be flat out finding a 30-year-old who could reflect properly on an experience that a 15-year-old is going through now because of the tech transformation and climate change.
Yes.
There's a lot happening
Yep.
that I can't relate to. As I said, is my kids have much more access to capital and resources than I did. But if you weighed it all up, I probably had a more idyllic raising in terms of being in a
Mm.
very safe, loved, wrapped up with uncles and aunties and all the stuff that you don't put a dollar figure on, but I had. So,
Mm.
the money isn't always the answer, right? And when you got 45, I mean, it's probably higher now. That was about 5, 6 years ago. 45,000 kids in out of home care in this country at
So many.
millions of dollars, like maybe $1 million a head, really. Um,
Mm.
well, where is a child safe and loved the most is at home, right? So if I'm putting half of it into putting young people in positions of power, right? I can't drop the voting age, I imagine, with $5 million. So if that's one, I think the other one I do is probably nearly go to the other side. I think one of the things that concerns me in Australia is that um, go governments play a very outsized role in community. And I think sometimes what we do is quash entrepreneurial spirit in those communities to solve their own problems. So I'd be getting the
Mm.
other 5 million sort of heading towards social entrepreneurs, young entrepreneurs who understand the problem because the problem has affected them. And so they're trying to
Mm.
solve through digital education or through maternal health, whatever they're trying to do in their communities to help children. I'd want to
Mm.
get the money to them. So as much as, my day job is all about very large non-profits with capital and this and that and the others, and they're very important parts of the fabric of society.
Absolutely.
Aged care, a lot of these industries don't exist without very large non-profits doing amazing work.
Mm.
But, I work in a very old firm. Innovation goes to die in institutions, right? Innovation will happen on the
Yep.
ground through people who are driven to solve a problem, and I'd like to get them some money. So that'd be where I'd sort of
Well,
split
that'd
it
be
out a
great,
bit.
and it certainly lines up with the Tas Community Fund too, because that place-based um, funding for sort of innovative ideas, and certainly it would be great to have more young social enterprising people in there.
Yeah,
But yeah, we're very much about trying to support communities to come up with their own solutions because they know what's going to work for them.
yeah, and
But
I mean,
interesting your
yeah,
comment about government being overly involved. Because in Tasmania that we have the 3 tiers of government, but 29 councils at a local
which
level.
is astounding when you told me that. I'm like, gee, it's like every individual might have their own council member.
Yeah,
But
pretty
they might be
much.
their own council member, I guess. So it's in yeah. There's you know, government is not necessarily governance, right? They're different things,
Uh-huh.
right? So and good
Yeah.
governance needs to be efficient, and that is not efficient or effective, I imagine. So, um, we know, and I believe, I believe governments have a significant role to play in society, but government is not the answer to every problem.
No, and often people are best placed to have a voice in how to solve their own
Yes.
problems as well. Yeah, and just need then the resourcing
Yeah.
to do that.
And this is why for ARACY, the investment dialogue for Australia's children is quite interesting because it brings an investment
Mm.
mindset of philanthropists to actually go and engage with communities and say, well, what do you want? Like, so the underlying premise, which, it would be hard to argue with, is that most families and communities know what's right for their children better than a bureaucrat, better than a philanthropist who's in another state, and all the researchers and the academics, they know. And so we know how much money is being deployed into early years education, for instance, and early years outcomes. And I guess our thesis in the investment dialogue is, well, that money, the money's part one of the solution, but part two is that it's allocated and deployed in the right way, in the right order for the community to get the outcome, right? And to be empowered
Absolutely.
and design what needs to be done with them, not, just throw the money down the pipe, whether they want the program or not, or whether they even need the program in that district.
Yeah. Shamal, do you have advice about how to ensure that philanthropists and philanthropic organisations are actually connecting with those communities and with the people who are the movers and shakers in them?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing because it's sort of a live evolution. So, as sort of the, what's really interesting, like all industries, philanthropy and philanthropists are given to sometimes very trendy ideas, and sometimes it's big ticket philanthropy, big bets, and then it's trust based, and then it's this, and then it's that, and sometimes you have to take all that out of it, and then we're getting a lot of systems thinking at the moment. Everyone's talking about systems, right?
Yep.
And sometimes in a very esoteric way that's quite inaccessible. In all honesty, the best systems thinkers I've seen, you can just turn up into a community and see them in action, and you realize, oh yeah, they've figured out, they've navigated the system, they understand what they're doing here, and it's usually about how do you get capital to them, rather than try and get them into institutionalize them. Is how do you move capital into the hands of people who know how to get it done in partnership with you. So philanthropists, I think, are doing a few things. They're asking much better questions around how you're collaborating to get this outcome. Like, what is your theory of change or your impact model or whatever?
Yep.
Are you, in some circumstances, are you, Aboriginal led? If it's for First Nations. So how do you have the voice of the beneficiary in your strategy? How is that developed? So I think philanthropists are partners in delivery, right? It's not their impact. The impact is created on the ground in the community. Both the non-profit who gets funded and the philanthropist doing the funding, they're both just enablers of that impact in a sense. They are not the creators of impact. The outcomes belong to the people. So philanthropists, I think, and so that's where we use governance, for instance, in ARACY and IDAC and those places. Say, well, how do we design governance so we center the voices of those who matter the most? And then how do we manage philanthropy in a way where we're using its assets and skills, appreciating that it has power? So I think sometimes we get caught up, money, power, philanthropy has it. But I think what we can't wring our hands and say, oh, isn't it terrible we have power? It's like, well, how do we listen to the beneficiary and apply that power for the outcome they want? So, what you do have is you have access, people who have access to ministers, people who have access to corporate leaders. It's not about, it's about using the right power and the right voice at the right table to move in the right direction. And so I feel like that's how the philanthropists are much more thoughtful at thinking about their whole suite of capability. The money they grant is one bit of the puzzle. It's what they can do through their relationships that really matter.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's nowhere more relational perhaps than Tasmania.
Oh, and that's and as we've done in the courses, you understand that is a double-edged sword, right?
Yes.
Because it gives you access, but it also means you may not be willing to disrupt a relationship by saying something that needs to be said, maybe for fear of, the tension in it. A lot of people just, human beings don't love conflict, especially personal conflict. It's something we talk about when Dr. Angeli Weller and I do sessions for board chairs on productive conflict. And one of the things we do talk about a lot is, well, how, I think from the therapeutic world, they have, most relationships that are strong have rupture and repair cycles. Even, I'm sure you have a best friend
Yes.
who's been with you for decades, and I'm sure there's been rupture in that relationship at times, but you've repaired it, and that actually, like a scar, probably makes it stronger for the next time there is a rupture. You know you've been through it. You've got a strength of relationship, and that's how
Yeah.
communities work, right? It's not like everyone needs to get along forever and no one's upset. That's
Yes.
not how human beings operate, and we have to make decisions, but you need to be able to do it authentically, you know, in a purpose-led way, and do it for the reason it needs to be done. So
Yeah.
I
Purpose
want
led.
much more tension on boards. I want much more tension between boards and management around outcomes and around accountability.
Interesting. So my tenure with the TCF is about to come to an end, and so it's been absolutely fantastic to be able to have some impact in Tasmania, particularly through giving communities access to money to make a difference and for impact. But also to be able to go to your Governance for Social Impact course and take that with me. And, I still think about it at least weekly in terms of how I apply it as a director, but also as a consultant working with others. But the board is going to be having a little look at, strategy going forward. So my final question to you, Shamal, is what would you give as a piece of advice to the TCF board about how they best might be able to change some systems or have impact in Tasmania?
Can I want to answer, I'm going to answer it, but I wouldn't mind asking you a question. How long have you been on the board?
6 years.
Yeah. So and I believe you guys travel around
Yes, we
quite a
do. We
bit.
go to each of the LGAs. Yeah.
Yeah. So do you have one person you've met on that trip somewhere, a young person or a child, or talk to that where it actually has changed your worldview in any way, or made you understand something that you didn't know before?
So many.
Yes, maybe too many, sorry.
Yeah,
It means
that's
you're
all right.
listening
No,
properly then. If you've been
yeah,
moved,
so
it
many.
means you're listening.
Probably one is actually somebody that a previous director has also done a podcast with.
Oh, really?
And his name's Dudley, and he was from the far northwest of the state. And he's just this really community-minded, engaged young person who's not so young anymore either. But his passion for making sure young people have a voice and for working with them and just turning up and understanding that you can't just be a fly-in, fly-out sort of person to support a community. The real community development and change happens when you're really in the place. But yeah, I met him when he did a leadership program that the TCF was running, he's extraordinary, and he got me to really think about that slowing down and not trying to solve everything straight away, that it takes time.
I think so. So, to my earlier point, it's like, how do I get Dudley money? Because I know he'll look
Yes,
after his community, right?
indeed.
He's not going to
Yeah,
buy
right.
a BMW, right? He's going to look after the
Yeah.
material basics that the children need.
You
So,
might buy musical instruments, but
exactly, exactly.
it'll be for the community.
Exactly.
Yeah,
If we can play
yeah,
that, yeah. Oh, hugely
yeah. It's
underestimate
great
the
fun.
arts we do as a country, and
Yes,
its power for healing and connection. I think it's massive. So,
absolutely.
what would I say to the TCF board? I would say, um, and I say this to philanthropists, if what you're doing is working, understand how to improve it. Don't lose interest in change just because we've been doing that for a while. Time to move on. It's like if you're doing something that work and it's a long-term game, then play the long-term game. It's like a football team that's sort of winning at halftime. Go, oh well, that's been working. Let's try something else. It's like no, you just
Yeah,
keep going
yeah.
out there. Just keep doing that. You'll win the game, right? So it's discipline in execution, and what it's interesting how much we conflate change with innovation, right? So it's interesting that if you go into sort of things like manufacturing and other things and businesses that scale, they innovate in what they call the green zone, which is their area of highest competency. The thing they're doing really well, they innovate in there because that drives extra returns, rather than, oh, we'll just go into the blue sky area where we may not even be very good. That's not actually innovation. I think people have this weird idea what innovation is. Innovation is actually understanding the mechanics of how you drive change and impact and iterating in there. So, you know, like we did this time when I was down there, it's like, how do we take this alumni group and take them to the next level? You know, once you drive it there, how do you deepen impact, not just keep going broader? And so it's about reflecting on what you've done in the last 7 years, let's say, under the last leadership cycle that's really worked, and doubling down on that and expanding that. That's what'll drive impact, not saying now we're going to do 7 new things because we've done those. It's not, you know, the change is relentless. And so, as you've said, I think you're over 100 now who've done this course, whether it's this course, whether it's something else, whatever it is, well, let's work with them. And across those 100, there'd be over 200 boards, I have no doubt, because they were serving on multiple boards and often in exec roles. How do we keep these 100 people connected and tuned and applying it weekly? Because, you know, I was just talking to a CEO last week, and she did the course and we did the application of that course in her organization as a merged entity. Right. And 7 years on, to see the impact of that organizational strategy on, you know, going from $2.5 million in housing for disadvantaged women to $141 million deployed in housing for those women.
Wow, in 7 years.
But that was because of the strategy work that happened right at the start. And then the balance sheet redeployment in line with that strategy. So it's as you know, it's a slow burn to pick up, you know, to pick up the wisdom from the ground. It's taken a long time to get here. There's no magic bullet. You're not going to click your fingers and then all of a sudden, you know, and I'd say, so that would be my advice to the board is reflect properly on what's worked. The beneficiaries are the people you serve, not, you know, as much as we like to think funders are the most powerful people in the room sometimes, it's, you know, we're all here for the beneficiary. And then think about what things go next to the things that work that might take it to the next place. And that, you know, if you have a strategy, you have to know your strategy is working. And if your beneficiaries, like those leaders, are telling you it is, and it's helping them drive more performance in those organizations, then you know, why would you stop?
Absolutely. Fantastic advice. Thank you. Oh, excuse me. Sorry. Thank you so much. I know that you're very busy and really appreciate you bearing with us while we sorted out those other techie issues.
It's perfectly fine. It's no problem at all. I'm looking forward to being back down there.
Excellent. Well, we're looking forward to having you. Very pleased that we're going to continue to fund that for the next few years anyway.
I know. I think you have such an opportunity down there because it's, as I said, and I deeply appreciate that, you know, Tasmania has some, you know, maybe not singularly unique challenges, but it has some unique elements of around funding, population sets, remoteness that they have to, but it is also of a scale. It is not lacking intent and it's not lacking heart and intellect. So, you know, that's why I really love coming down there, is because if you can see that this group of people working together can get it done and they can shift the needle. As I said, is maybe we need to get into some government departments as well and influence some people to broaden the way they're thinking about, you know, I think sometimes we leave the government out of problem solving because we consider them the problem when they are in fact potentially the most important lever that needs to be pulled, but in partnership, not by haranguing them for making mistakes, but by inviting them in as partners.
Yeah, and working together. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. All right. Thank you so much.
Absolute pleasure. Nice to see you again and have a great weekend.
You too.
Thanks.
You too. Take care. Bye.
You've been listening to the Breaking Barriers Building Futures podcast, presented by the Tasmanian Community Fund. The fund seeks to increase community wellbeing by removing barriers to learning and to help Tasmanians to develop, deliver and lead responses to their needs. For more information, go to tascomfund.org.